I'd also like to thank you for allowing me into your homes for this third episode of our second edition of this new show series here on Access. This should be our time slot. I think it's pretty much solidified now that we will be here every Thursday at 9 o'clock on Channel 10. So again, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in and viewing. I would like to thank quickly everyone that attended the philosophical and metaphysical study group that we had last night at Opal Divine. So we had a pretty good turnout and lively discussion as usual. And again, I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to come out and join us there at Opal Divines. Excuse me. I'd also like to thank Smiles and Russell for listing the new Access schedule in their magazine, the Paratimes, and also the Trailer Park Show for putting us within their scroll of all the new Access shows. So I thank those folks for that. And this evening I would like to discuss some of the psychological aspects of esoteric science. The show title is The 3 Ds, and I wanted to save my producer a little bit of trouble, so I didn't make him spell everything out. But these 3 Ds would be detachment, discrimination, and dispassion. And so I'll get into those a bit more as I get more so into the show a little bit here. But to consider, again, the aspects that I just mentioned in the terms of a psychology. Psychology is a relatively new science. It's really only been around in its current format, probably a little over 100 years thereabouts. But the reason that we see in this more recent time of ours, this sort of a science coming into the forefront and being more useful to us now in this day and age, is because of the evolution of man. Man has evolved and put himself into a position where, again, this type of science is applicable and is of practical use for modern day man. And the fact that, again, man is more specialized through the process of evolution, man's physical vehicle has refined itself to the point where the emotional and mental nature of man deems it necessary that we have some sort of a body of thinking, some sort of science, psychology, that's become, that will allow us to look into these aspects of man. Also, our lives are much more complex, and the interactions that take place in each individual's daily lives have really, they're much more hastened these days. Again, the fast-paced style of life that everyone has become accustomed to in our modern societies. And that also is part of this whole, again, this complexity that's part of human evolution. That's part of the reason why psychology is more prevalent in this time and day and age. Now, in ancient times, the mystery tradition was the custodian of what psychology is part of today, and psychology just being part of this whole esoteric science tradition. But in ancient times, those particular individuals that did have, again, the physical makeup, the relationship between the mental and the emotional aspects of man, somewhat ready to make use of this process, were placed in a position to be able to make use of certain knowledge that was traditionally passed along by an oral tradition initially at first. And that these individuals, these people that proved themselves worthy to be given special understanding and special knowledge, that they were brought into this mystery tradition, and they became what were known as initiates into these various traditions of ancient times. And again, certain people were more specialized and were fit for this type of schooling, this type of learning, and this type of practice. The average humanity in ancient times was not really so specialized, and they more or less followed along whatever the leaders would say, and with more or less a very simple faith approach to the religion, the dominating religions of the time. And there wasn't a whole lot of individual thought amongst the general public, and there wasn't the availability that we have today through mass communications and the different, again, aspects of our modern society that allow much interaction on a global scale. And so man has evolved from that early stage to, again, be more specialized. And average man today is as evolved, as many of these candidates for initiation were maybe 1,000 years or more ago. And that the average man in the streets, because of the refined nature of our physical vessel and the relationship, again, between, in particular, our emotional nature or our desire nature and the mental or thinking aspect of a man that, again, us being so evolved and refined that the science of psychology has had to come into play to take the place of what was initially given to man through this mystery tradition of olden times. And so when we consider psychology as a science, an esoteric science, we have to consider that it's a science of understanding the inner hidden portions of humankind and what is within or esoteric to humanity, to mankind. And it does not delve into the anatomy, the anatomical aspects of man, and not what is physiologically a portion of man in the respect of heart, lung, liver, not the physical makeup, but the inner unseen qualities are what truly give one their makeup or their constitution. And that is what it's part and parcel of the whole study of psychology, and why that concentrates again on the inner aspect, the true inner nature of man. Again, not the inner nature in the sense of his anatomy as a surgeon would be concerned with, but the inner makeup in the sense of man's emotions and man's thinking apparatus. And so again, these qualities are what truly make a man. These inner aspects truly make up a man and make the man what he is. And so if we consider from the old systems of delineating the bodies of man, it's probably easiest to start from a threefold aspect. And there are also sevenfold delineations of mankind, and there are also ninefold, and they're all applicable and they all are proper, but it's just a little bit different interpretation of how you want to split up and consider the individual bodies of man. But if we do look at it as a threefold system, that we initially look at the closest to the dense physical is the etheric or energy body, and that is what, as I've spoken on this show of before, it pushes the blood through the circulatory system, it enacts the nervous system, and it allows the electrical impulses that make up our brain wave workings, and it basically just keeps the system animated. And so that's the energy or etheric body. And then above that we have the emotional or desire body, and then outside of that we have the mental body. Now, keeping in mind that the dense physical brain is not mind. Mind, again, is inside, it's within, it's the inner aspect of man. And what is the way the physical brain works is not, it's just basically like a stereo receiver. You have to put a signal into it from another area, which again is the mental plane or the mental aspect. If we don't have the quality of mind to be able to input information into the brain for the brain to process and use like a little computer or calculator, then there would be no brain activity in that sense as far as breaking apart and taking apart thought and analyzing thought and using thought through constructive means through the physical body. And so that being the case, one of the first steps that a person that considers delving into esoteric science as a way of life has to consider is this relationship of this energy body to the emotional or desire body, and then that in turn, that relationship to the mental aspect, the thinking apparatus. And that consists of both the lower concrete mind, which is the mind that says, I want to pick up a pen, I need to eat, those kind of things that are having to do with physical things more so. And then there's also the abstract aspect of mind, which is based with concepts and based with the ideas of spirituality, for instance, aspiration, love, and these higher aspects of mankind would be more tied into the higher abstract aspect of mind. But the key has always been to find a balance or a relationship, an even relationship between these aspects of man's bodies. Now, keeping in mind that the etheric body is tied into the glandular system, and all of that allows man to be what he truly is. That's the end result of this process. And so by virtue of whatever kind of a relationship exists between, again, the mental, emotional, and the etheric, which is tied to the dense physical, whatever that relationship consists of will also make man what he is. That will be the constitution or the makeup of that individual man, whether he's more emotionally predisposed, or whether he is more mentally predisposed. Those things factor in. And so there's always a ratio, usually in most people, and they're going to be either more emotionally centered or more mentally centered. But again, the key, once one begins to consider this as a science and try to make some practical application of this in one's own life, then there is a definite need and a definite desire to find that balance through not being overly emotional about any one thing, not being overly mental and analytical about any one thing, but to find a balance and to ultimately reach a point where the head rules the heart, and then intelligent activity can carry forth from that balanced relationship. And so again, there is the concept of the integrated personality, and the personality again consisting of the etheric, emotional, and mental aspects, and that by integrating these three aspects, that they function and work together as one total or one whole, and then onto that can be added the consciousness of our own individual soul, and then in turn on top of that can be added the aspect that we know of as spirit, or the Father in Heaven aspect. And then so there's a combining process. Once we begin with the initial aspect of the integrated personality and finding the balance between this emotional, mental, and energy body that we operate through in the dense physical. And so we find our way through integrating the personality and balancing and rounding out our personality nature, that we again can add soul and add spirit. Now, some aspects, emotional aspects of the personality, one thing in particular would be considered happiness. Happiness is strictly an aspect of the personality nature. Happiness is not really tied to the soul. Joy is the quality that is tied to the soul, and there is a definite distinct difference between happiness and joy. Joy is a much more refined, more closer to spirit, although it is related to the soul, and then bliss finally would be equated with spirit, and the condition of nirvana, as that's spoken of in the Buddhist tradition, would also tie in with the aspect of bliss. And one's final reward that one would reach after many, many lifetimes, not the immediate afterworld one finds oneself in after death, but after many, many lifetimes and much experience, one can finally eliminate their desire for the physical plane, and they can reach that state of what you could kind of consider equilibrium to a certain degree in this bliss condition, this nirvana condition, and that would be considered a true heaven, or a true heaven, as opposed to, again, our afterworld state that we normally find ourselves in. Now, in order to start regaining independence, one of the main aspects to start gaining our own independence and start being able to operate to the optimum through the physical vessel is through self-observation, getting to know oneself. Man, know thyself. We've hammered the point home here on the show many times, as does Jeff Contreras on his show, and for very good reason. When one can really know oneself, then one can make much understanding of, in an honest way. You honestly can gauge yourself, and you can say, okay, I'm emotional about these aspects, I'm more mental about these particular aspects, and find, by getting to know yourself, what it is that makes you tick, and how you can, again, strike some sort of a balance and find this integrated personality, and again, work through an integrated, unified vehicle. And so that is part of regaining our independence and not being pulled to and fro by things that we may deal with in our everyday lives, whether that's in our working situation, what we may view on television, relationships with other people. If we can observe every action that we make during the day in an objective manner, and to act as if we're standing back, observing ourselves, then we can start to gauge and see what it is about us individually. Now, that's a very difficult thing at first to get into, is to be able to, as you're carrying out daily activities and you're just going through the process of daily living, to keep this detached attitude of one watching oneself. And it would almost be like imagining a camera watching oneself, and having a camera on oneself during all the day's activities, and being able to view that tape back and to see, how did you react in this certain situation? How did this affect you? And then gauge and see, and again, check yourself and see what it is that offends you, makes you, again, happy or joyous, what makes you afraid, All of these things that you have to determine about yourself in order to make any real progress in applying this as something that can be used for personal gain. And again, this idea of self-observation, or the idea of considering that a camera is watching over one. Now, certainly, we're very familiar with all the cameras that are around the city and how there are others that are constantly monitoring and watching us. And that's definitely something to keep in mind as well. But this is more of a concept of viewing oneself in an objective way, again, to be able to build upon oneself, build upon one's own inner nature, and to improve oneself through, again, gauging at any given time how we feel, how we think, and to be able to be more conscious of that activity and to take control more so. And again, could gain independence through gaining back our emotional nature and gaining back our mental faculties and using them in an intelligent and constructive manner and using them in a unified approach, as opposed to there being a bunch of wrangling between the two bodies and a bunch of misspent energy and misdirected energy as a result of this non-union and a non-working together of these different independent aspects of man. Now, again, keeping the aspect in mind of watching oneself, there's a term, the attitude of the observer, and that again describes the attitude of someone that's detached from what's going on and seeing things in an objective manner. So that is one way that you'll allow yourself to reveal your own weaknesses, so you can see by gauging yourself and checking yourself, again, your own excuse me, your own weaknesses and your own strengths as well, and how, again, you're able to improve yourself by virtue of this, making use of this means, and by just understanding yourself more so. And this brings us to the 3 Ds, and try to get into them a little bit more and to try to explain a bit about how they tie into this idea of making oneself a whole functioning person as opposed to a fractured person where you have factions of yourself warring against each other. Now, first of all, the idea of detachment. Now, to detach oneself, that's kind of a tricky concept as well, so I'm going to try to bring some elucidation to this concepts. But from the Christian phraseology, to use a concept to be in the world but not of the world is pretty much sums up in a good way this concept of detachment. Certainly we have to be in the world, we have to operate through the dense physical vehicle, and we can't ignore our physical opportunities and obligations and responsibilities in our daily life. We have to make use of this dense physical vehicle, and we have to make use of our interactions with other individuals and other groups and what have you, in order to make our way through Earth existence. And so certainly we have to dive in and delve into matter and be of matter, but to be in the world but not of the world. It also alludes to a more spiritual inclination. And know thyself is definitely the basis for all of that. So this detached sense that one has is a matter of removing oneself from any concept of form. Anything that has a form that we attach ourselves to is going to cause us some sort of limitation and generally causes some sense of suffering, because we attach some significance, some value to something of form, whether that be you're hooked on a particular kind of candy, or you're a smoker, or you're an alcoholic, or whatever the case may be. When we're attached to things of form, and it can even be a relationship as well, if you're very attached to an individual as well, then that can be an unhealthy attachment, and that can cause us to either be emotionally predisposed and overwhelmed to a certain thing, or mentally predisposed, and always, and either way, we're always in a state of wanting to achieve and attain and retain some certain thing, some form. And so when we find ourselves attaching to form, then that's when we find, again, that we tend to suffer, and that we find some roadblocks and some stumbling blocks. And that is all part of the learning process. As we navigate through this earth experience and through this material vehicle, it is part and parcel of what we do on this planet to experiment and experience over time what we learn through moving through this material this vessel, or vehicle, and that we learn through being in matter how to navigate through the pitfalls and the various shortcomings that we find in the material existence. And so once we learn to, again, detach ourselves from certain thinking, then we can make more use of a positive energy, a constructive flow of energy, and make more rapid progress in our own evolution, and also be more productive servants of humanity as well. And that's a key thing that I'd like to touch upon as well. Any improvement that one makes in one's own life, if one is doing it for what I would consider the proper reasons, and that is to help humanity, one is interested in helping oneself, but it is helping oneself so that one can better help other individuals and have the capacity and ability to do that in a better, more efficient fashion. And that is all part and parcel of esoteric science. And so again, detaching ourselves from certain things. Now, we can detach ourselves from certain physical limitations, and that may be, for instance, a physical handicap. We can detach ourselves from maybe some particular disease. If we have maybe we have a debilitating disease, and that is hindering us to a certain degree, I would encourage anyone that's in that kind of condition that certainly we have to be cognizant and understanding of those conditions. If one has, again, if one is handicapped and wheelchair bound, for instance, then that is going to be a real limitation that one has to deal with. Excuse me. But there is a way in which we can detach oneself from these kind of circumstances, and in the sense that one would not feel self-pity, for instance. That's a key thing. If one is injured and one has a disease, for instance, or an inability, not to get caught up in the self-pity cycle. That's definitely one aspect of it. And to be able to detach oneself at some level from the condition one may find oneself in. And that's with anything. Anybody that's feeling down on their luck about their situation and circumstances, if they could only detach themselves and analyze and look back as if you were not yourself, but just a stranger walking by that has some insight into what you're going through, that can watch and see how you're dealing with these circumstances and situations. And if you can use that concept to, again, stand back from your own situation somewhat and analyze in a clear, concise fashion without the emotional flooding in and without the over-analytical mental aspect, then one can come to a better, truer understanding of one's circumstances, and one can find a way to navigate through, again, these pitfalls and shortcomings by this exercise, by detaching oneself from one's own woes and worries, and to see how one can find a way out. If you step back further and further, it's kind of like the satellite photography of the Earth. You focus out a little bit, you focus out a little bit, you focus out a little bit, and pretty soon, if you focus out far enough, you see your problem, your individual inability in relation to a larger whole. And you stop localizing and focusing in on just your own self, and you see yourself in the larger whole, in the larger reality, and then you can again make real progress in seeing and detaching from individual inabilities perhaps into how one can still be useful or make some creative expression within the larger context of things. It's just a matter of stepping back, looking at oneself in a detached manner, and not looking at oneself in an emotional or over-analytical manner. And also to consider time limitations. Some people feel that if they work a 40-hour week and they have a family to attend to, and they have all these different things that they need to be involved in that tend to take up their free time, that might be something that people find as an excuse to not make some kind of effort, to not fulfill some creative expression at some level. That, I just don't have enough time, and so I can't pull it off, and I'd like to do this, I'd like to do that, but I just don't have the time. And that's often an excuse that individuals make. And even people that have a very spiritual slant, and they are leaning very much towards spiritual identity and things of spirit, may still find themselves limited by this kind of thinking, and it does tend to hinder one from contributing their own individual energy to the overall expression of energy that's taking place on the planet right now. And also, the media infused fear and propaganda. That's a big thing to consider as well. Constantly, we're bombarded on television, newsprint, internet. There are all kinds of means of communication and means of exchange of energy and means of accessing information rather, which is energy anyway, if you want to look at it esoterically. But nonetheless, the media-infused fear and propaganda that we tend to see so often has a way of keeping us limited, and until we can detach ourselves from what we see on television and learn to see things with a discriminating eye, and I'll go into the aspect of discrimination a bit more here in just a second, or I'll start to go into that in a second here. But it's a matter of watching, again, anything that we take in, any influence that we take in, or any force or energy that we may feel ourselves involved with, if we can discriminate more so. And that doesn't mean discrimination as far as in a racial sense. It means discrimination, or another word you can use would be discernment. Using discrimination and using discernment in filtering out what is real from what is unreal, and learning truth from falsehood, and using our own intuition as our gauge to find our way through. And that is a key thing to keep in mind as well, that if we trust our intuition, then we can find our way and navigate through in a discriminating fashion or a discerning manner, and we can see through contrast what's good and what's bad and what is right for us in our individual effort as well. And so, keeping in mind the idea of discriminating when one is watching the media, if one could just keep that detached, first of all, keep a detached outlook when one is watching some kind of media information, and then also use a discriminating, discerning eye when one is watching something, being mindful that there are always agendas behind what's being reported at any given time, and that's going to color that particular slant that's being fed to us. And so we have to be mindful, again, stepping back and viewing the larger picture. The farther we can get back and detach ourselves from individual local events, no matter how horrific they may be, the more so we can see the larger picture and have an understanding of what's going on in our world and in our own daily lives, and how we can react properly to these things that come our way, and we can approach them intelligently, and we don't have to let fear overtake us. And that's the key thing too, because fear is a big part of the agenda behind the mainstream media in many instances. These things that are reported purposefully to keep us locked into some kind of fear mode and some kind of mentality of, being distrustful of others and being afraid to even leave one's home in some instances. And so that would be, for instance, like the sniper attack. Now, certainly, I'm talking about detachment and discernment and dispassion, that sort of thing. So I'm going to espouse somewhat my opinion on what's going on. And I would ask that individuals look at this information, my opinions, in a detached manner as well, and to kind of weigh the thoughts in your own mind with your own heart and your own intuition. But I do feel like the sniper attack that's going on currently is very much a government mind control psychological operation that is infringing on one or maybe more individuals and that they're terrorizing this particular area. And you see how they're bringing in troops to help police the area, and they're using reconnaissance planes to fly over and photograph the area. There was talk of using the Predator drone, the martial law to suspend any kind of sport gun shooting. And then the debate is already framed. You see the debate instantly framed for both Congress and the mainstream media. You see in Congress that they're already considering how they can incorporate military and use the military in conjunction with the civilian law enforcement to further this agenda, and again, to keep individuals fearful. When people are afraid just to get out of their car and pump gas as a result of this kind of phenomenon, then it's very unfortunate, but it's all part and parcel, in my estimation, of a larger agenda. And this is just one little diversion right now, the sniper attack, that's, again, imposing a lot of, it's going to allow some imposition possibly of new laws or new interpretations of laws. And it's demonizing the gun culture. It's demonizing gun ownership. And the media debate is framed in the sense that they're showing some some firing ranges, and they're discussing with these individuals, why they feel it's necessary to keep the guns proliferated, and why they feel it's necessary to go out and practice with a gun and shoot at a range, and stay up to speed with one's capacity to be able to use a firearm. Why is that important to these certain individuals? And again, they use this sniper incident as an example of why everyone should be disarmed. Well, D.C. already, by virtue of the 10 square mile by 10 square mile that area that it is, already is kind of an exclusive area that has its own certain qualities as a result of what it is, the 10 square mile by 10 square mile area. And so that area already is somewhat subject to certain different interpretations of laws and what have you. And also, I'd like to speak a bit about the Bali explosion, the explosion at the nightclub. This, I see, somewhat following suit to what took place after the Oklahoma City building was blown up. And people were very shocked that this kind of a so-called terrorist event could take place on American soil. And so, Oklahoma City happened, and then pretty shortly afterwards, an Australian kid, some surfer kid, supposedly went crazy and shot 20 some odd people in the single worst mass murder in Australian history. And so they in turn banned guns and passed sweeping anti-gun legislation. And then very shortly afterwards, you saw in Dunblane, Scotland, a teacher that went a little loony and killed a bunch of school kids, and so they were able to confiscate guns in Britain and also pass legislation to forbid the citizenry from owning and maintaining firearms there as well. And so you see them following suit and bringing them on board. The Americans being the trendsetters in that respect, in that the initial incident would take place in the States with like an Oklahoma City bombing, and then we have Australia following suit by virtue of the Tasmanian shooter and them having sweeping legislation that emulates our sweeping anti-terrorism legislation, and then followed by the British event where the shooting took place. And so you see this chain to bring aboard first Australia, then Britain, in this fashion, in this order. And so now we flash forward to current days, and we see, first of all, the World Trade Center attack, again, a monumental attack on American soil, unprecedented, unbelievable to so many that could take place here in the country. And then we have sweeping the Patriot Act, sweeping legislation to basically sweeping anti-terrorism legislation, the new edition. And then we have the Bali nightclub incident, in which a lot of Australians are killed, and so they are brought on board by virtue of this, and they are lamenting how that they are now victims of this terrorist attack, and how we really are not immune, and this is a global war on terrorism. And so you see their political officials and their talking heads espousing that particular party line. And so we see, again, the Australians were brought on board as a result of some kind of so-called terrorist activity. And the only thing that remains to be seen is if there will be some sort of a terrorist event in Britain. Now, the handful of individuals that I term those that wish to enslave us, I don't believe that they are above using the exact same pattern, because they just don't think that enough individuals would be wary and be able to discern and discriminate and see exactly what's taking place in context of a larger picture. And so if indeed there is any sort of a terrorist attack, so-called, on Great Britain proper, Scotland you would basically have to consider as part of Great Britain proper, more or less, anyway. But if that same chain of command or same set of circumstances unfolds in that same manner, then I think you're going to again see a pattern that certain individuals are not too bold to try to attempt to pull off. So that's my little prediction. If that does indeed take place, and there is on Great Britain some sort of a terrorist attack, to again help bring them on board more so for a war against Iraq or whatever they need to get public support and pump up public support for. They need allies, and in this instance I do believe it's more so with the war in Iraq that they need allies, and so they're going to try to bring them on board. So it remains to be seen as to what's going to take place in Great Britain in the next, let's say, 6 months or so. But if it does indeed unfold in that respect, I won't be entirely surprised, and It's not that I'm that psychic necessarily. It's just that being able to, again, detach oneself and see the chain of events and see the larger picture, that one can logically connect the dots and see where the next move likely will be. Also, those that wish to enslave us do like to use ritual and symbol and like to do things in an orderly fashion. And so it's entirely plausible that they would be willing to, again, reinforce the initial ritual that took place through Oklahoma City and that following chain of events, to reinforce that ritual through, again, the World Trade Center Tower, Bali, and then some potential future attack on Great Britain. And just, times whatever, hyped up more so and more so, just as each attack has taken more numbers and the death toll is higher and higher, so that more sweeping legislation can be brought in without very much scrutiny, and really draconian measures can be brought aboard and enacted, or they were dormant, but now they're being enacted. They were on the books, dormant, but now being enacted. All these things can follow suit in this manner, and we see this ratcheting down taking place. Now again, thinking of discrimination, not in the sense of discrimination against individual races or individual religions or individual political ideologies, but a discriminating sense of who's zooming whom, of what's right and what's wrong, and an ability for us to understand and know the good, the true, and the beautiful. And ideas of pride and a sense of separation arise from the misuse of the capacity or quality of discrimination. Also, the concept of political correctness thrives on the misuse of the term discrimination, and we see that agendas behind that, how that's twisted and molded to fit a particular agenda and to cause bad discrimination, to cause evil discrimination, unharmony, unrest between individuals. And that's all part and parcel of, again, a misuse, a twisting of a good thing, which is a discriminating sense, a discerning sense, a judgmental sense of knowing, again, just simple things, right from wrong, good from bad. And so also right use of speech is very important, and that's something I like to touch upon as well. Guarding one's speech. Words can help, they can hinder, they can heal. But we have to be very careful in what we say. And so when we think before we speak, that's a very important aspect. That's also a way of detaching oneself from one's emotions, and without just flying off into some kind of a rage, one would collect oneself, think, and then perhaps speak or act. So it's very key to gauging oneself in that sense and to guard one's speech, to be cautious as to what one says, to who we decide to speak to about any certain event or what have you, and to be very cautious of stray thoughts. Just stray thoughts can cause us much problem. They can be a waste of energy, and they can lead us away from using our power again, or using our independence for some real constructive ends. Excuse me. And then being caught up in just some sort of stray thought thinking, diversionary thinking, reactionary thinking, or just sidetracked daydreams, flights of fancy. And also thoughts of ill intent are very, very bad, and those are the most dangerous. Thoughts of ill intent, they are sent out from one person to another, and those thoughts definitely do cause pain and injury to others. But it's also like a boomerang, and that pain that we cause by using hurtful words or our hurtful thoughts and thinking towards another come back to us like a boomerang, and so they tend to injure us. That same velocity of intent, evil intent or ill intent that we send that thought or that word out with is going to come back to us again with equal velocity and hit home like a boomerang. And so basically this boils down to, in a large sense, to being a user of one's own will. Again, finding independence through an exercise of the will, and to find a way to move through undesirable aspects and obstacles on this earth plane. That is all part and parcel of what we can do, what we can practically do to, again, check ourselves at all turns and to understand why we do what we do in our individual lives. If we're prone to certain thinking, we're prone to making excuses for ourselves and rationalizing things, why is it that we do that? And why is it that we feel a certain way? Also, dispassion. It's important to keep oneself in a dispassionate mode of thinking and a dispassionate place when one is looking at any events, or one is gauging something in one's own life. Now, again, keeping the emotions in check. Dispassion, obviously, is the opposite of passion. Passion being an overflow of emotion, and dispassion being a control or constraining of the emotional quality or aspect. And so, again, keeping in mind that the head has to rule the heart, that we have to think before we speak, think before we act, and allow our head, our mind, to rule over our emotional roller coasters that we tend to go on. And so if we can love intelligently, and if we can wisely apply love, that is part of the goal of esoteric science, and that is what we can accomplish through, again, a discriminating sense, a sense of detachment, and a sense of dispassion, or removing ourselves emotionally from circumstances. If things hit close to home, and things happen to people we know, we tend to react more emotionally to things. If we hear about something on the news that affects so-and-so in another state, we don't tend to react so emotionally, and that's also part of the idea of dispassion. Removing, again, things from our own little nest, and not letting them affect us just because it hits home close to our area, maybe our friends, our family, and our own individual lives, that we have to exercise, again, this discriminating sense and this sense of dispassion and detachment, and remove ourselves from these undesirable emotions and these stray or ill thoughts in particular. So I would like to go ahead and grab a call and see what's going on this afternoon, or this evening, rather. Hello, caller, are you on the air?
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good. Do you have a question this evening?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Are you talking about revolution?
Am I talking about revolution?
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking about an individual revolution in the sense especially of one having a revolution against the lower nature and the things in one's life that distract one from being more constructive and misusing our energies, because each individual person has energy and they are affected by energies and forces around them as well, and their relationship to other individuals and circumstances that we come across in our daily lives. But we can gain control in our individual lives without these things overwhelming us, by using, again, detachment, discrimination, or discernment, and dispassion, and looking at things objectively, and thinking about things that... I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I understand where you come from.
Mm-hmm.
So God created dust and got the rib from Adam. And how you feel about that?
Well, I feel like that's all symbolic, and so that would be another way, too, of if one can look at religion or religious writings from a detached manner...
Oh, you feel like it's religious?
Well, no, I'm just saying anything, whether it's religion, politics, anything along those lines, that if we step back and look at things in an objective manner, then we get to see a lot of times, for instance, Republican and Democrat. Well, at the top, the leadership basically says the same thing. There is no real difference.
Do you believe what God is saying about creation?
I believe that there is...
Do you believe it's coming from the energy from God and what you're talking about?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, yes. Everything evolves from God, whether it be good or bad. If you get to the highest levels, that's, again, a way of stepping back and looking at something in a detached manner. If one looks at God in a detached manner, true, I mean, we should have love for God if we want to make that approach and have an understanding of God. But to have that intelligent aspect of discernment, to be able to intelligently understand, because I think it's part and parcel of our obligation and responsibility, is to intelligently try to understand God and not just blindly follow any religious leader or any religious text without thinking, what does this really mean? What is this that I'm putting all my faith and belief into? What does it really mean? Is this purely symbolic, this document, this doctrine, or is it literal? You know, either way. So it's a matter of discerning and discrimination. It looks as if that caller's gone, but thank you for taking the time to call, and have a nice evening. But again, in the instance of a little girl, if a little girl has a debilitating disease and passes away at a very early age, or if you've witnessed a little girl getting hit and struck by a car, she's riding her bicycle, for instance, and she gets hit by a car, how are you going to react to that situation? You know, are people that are going to say, oh, look, God is cruel. He just took the life of this little girl. She was just riding her bike down the street and she got struck down. How cruel is God? But that is not the case. God is not evil. If we detach ourselves and think about these things objectively and understand more so divine law and our place in the whole workings, then we can view something like that and we can have a detached attitude about it. Now, certainly, it's not wrong to feel remorseful, perhaps, or feel some emotion in a sense like that. It would be difficult not to. We'd be very cold and callous not to have some kind of emotion. But then to step back and understand, if a little girl were to get hit by a car, we're using that analogy, if we witness it, why did it happen? Well, if we think about the law in the sense that there is karma and reincarnation, and that this event was only part of the working out of the law, as opposed to some wrathful or vengeful God that just struck down this little girl and took her life for no good reason, that it was just a random occurrence, that's when we get caught up in the emotional aspects of it. Excuse me, but to detach ourselves more so from that, I think is an important aspect to consider, and to, again, have an understanding as to why we feel a certain way. Again, things that hit home immediately are going to have more of an effect on us in most instances than something we may witness that takes place far across the globe in another land. Tragedies are equally tragedies, but it's just a matter of locality in a lot of instances as to, how close it affects us, how close to the heart and how close to the vest does this individual circumstance affect me? And that's often going to determine our action and activity or our response to certain things. But to detach ourselves is going to give us much ability to make ground and to, again, make some practical use of this physical body and to gain back independence, to not be fearful of circumstances, to not, if you see an accident, don't think, oh, well, my goodness, I'm going to get hit next. I got to be extra careful. We might be thinking of things like that, but again, don't go around thinking all of a sudden that, I don't want to leave the house because I'm going to get hit next by a car. It's that kind of thinking that we have to detach ourselves from, and that's a bit of an extreme example, but nonetheless, it hopefully would fit. Hello, caller, you're on the air?
Hey, how's it going tonight?
You're good, yourself?
Hey, all right. I think you've been basically right on everything that you...
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing you. Could you please speak up?
You've been saying the right thing all night, and you haven't been wrong about anything that you've been saying so far. I've been listening for the last 5 minutes. I hate that caller earlier, went off the air because I wanted to hear more of what he had to say, because he caught my attention the way he was speaking, and I see that he had caught your attention too.
Yes.
But I think one thing else that you absolutely left out, it was that they got the drugs over here too. All this here has just been a setup for all of us here in America that is trying to live.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look back at history, everyone that we had that came spoke out about it. They either killed or they did away with, and many people that was tied within what had happened passed away or so forth killed. So this is something that's been plotting and been planned for years. And it's people that get into office that does this, and majority of the time it's the Republicans, and it's like political. What people have to understand is like this. People that get in politics sooner or later end up in the government if they pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get in with the government, from what I've been seeing for its politics and everything, they already know what's going on. They understand, just like the war that's getting ready to happen. What is the real reason behind it? Don't lie to me and get on television and say it's one thing, and then in reality it's something else, because we have to live in this world, and we have our children that has to live in this world.
Right.
And we have to buy back our freedom, because right now everybody is a criminal in the aspect in my eyes of what I see, because they don't want to trust a fellow American who's been here for years. Why should I have to feel threatened to our own government? I have no reason for that.
Well, we shouldn't have to. That's a good thing, good point to bring up.
We are born here, and we are Americans. So why are we threatened as people? You write all these documents like you said earlier, you spoke about. The documents, we need to find out what's going on. We need to get more ordinary people out. We need to get them aware of what's going on, because right now they're just being blinded because they're too foolish to see that they got them wrapped up in the material world, and they don't want you and I to be friends. They don't want you and I to know one another,
Right.
so we can talk because
Right.
we have a lot of things in common.
Right.
So they take all that away from you and get you distracted on something else, while behind your back they bring something else in upon you. But I don't want to take up too much of your time, but you're absolutely right about what you're saying.
Well, I do think you had made a lot of solid points, and I do thank you very much for taking the time to call.
All right.
A lot of solid points, and again, drugs is another aspect too of a way of, if we attach ourselves to drugs, then we detach ourselves from reality, and we get caught up in all that thing. And certainly there is an agenda behind a lot of why the drugs are brought in, who's bringing them in, the reasons for this, the reasons why we're made to be distrustful of one another, why we are fearful of our government and those that we see in the places of power, and that, yes, in most instances, those that have made it to that high level, they have already sold out, they've already sold their souls, and they know very well what the agenda is, and they want to be part of it for their own selfish reasons. But you yourself, and I would say many others, are seeing a larger reality, and by your own detached outlook and your own discriminating and discerning sense, you, like many other individuals, are finding a way to wade through all this stuff and see that there's a lot of common ground, that, hey, we can work together. We don't have to look at this as a hopeless situation. We don't have to be bogged down by fear and all of this political correctness and all of this different stuff that keeps people divided. And we can, again, find common ground and work our way through. And I do thank you very much for those solid points, because you did make a lot of good, solid references. Hello, caller.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I just wanted to say that I have a lot of respect for your views, and I wanted to get your opinion on my view. I wanted to ask you if your thought on religion is man trying to get to God, or man's way trying to get to God, and if you think that God has made a way for us to get to him.
I would say yes, definitely, that there are many ways, and that all the different religions came around for a reason. You know, there are certain people that say, you know, anything that it seems as if they feel that anything that came before Christ was bad, evil, pagan, corrupt, whatever, that it didn't have any validity. But you can't discount all of our history and just say that only the past 2,000 years have significance for us. Everything in its place has significance. And I think that is ultimately the goal, is to express love and to not hold back love. When we hold back love from others and don't exchange love, then we suffer ourselves. If we can exchange love and exchange understanding and evolve, this whole evolutionary process. So part of evolving, in my outlook, is to find a way of return to divinity, to spirit. And that is something that compels my daily thinking, my emotions, my activity, is to hopefully bring some of this information out that I can hopefully help people through this discussion and various things I'm involved in order to make people aware and to regain independence. That is the key thing. Regain our freedoms and regain our independence is very key. Is there anything else that you care to add?
Just that a lot of the things that are going on in the world are guided by a lot of different forces. And,
yes.
And we have protection spiritually. And,
yes.
We also have to take authority and control physically.
Yes. Yes.
And I hope that everybody can see, you know, or is able to learn, you know, to see and kind of open their eyes.
I certainly hope so. I do thank you for taking the time to call, but I certainly hope that's the case. And that is really part of my hope, is that I see, really honestly, so many individuals like you and the last caller that are aware of a larger scenario and can get past a lot of the fog and get past a lot of the misdirection and see what's really important. That's the key, to find what's really important and to work together, I think, is very important. And these kind of calls and things like that give me much faith and hope and confidence in that area. Hello, caller. How are you this evening?
All right. Yeah, I just like to say that the soul is like a very important part of people's lives, and they seem to some people, they seem to not care about that because they're all into the greed, and that's pretty much what the politicians are about, and they really don't have a good soul, I think.
Well, they just don't make good use of the soul that they have, is more like it, I would say. But yeah, I think there are a lot of them that have kind of sold out, and for their own selfish interest, they're willing to sacrifice the good of many people, and they're willing to walk over many individuals, and they don't mind that others have to lose their lives so that they may gain perhaps some property, some affluence, something for themselves at the expense of others. And until that thinking stops and enough people are aware of it and willing to get together and say, hey, enough is enough, then we will continue to be taken advantage of by those individuals.
Yeah, the thing is, though, I mean, I think that we live our lives here on earth by, you know, what actions we take and what we do, and pretty much our lives are you know, equivalent to 80 years or however, whatever the average lifespan is. But in reality, I think it's 1 second, because I think that God is created everything, and He can pretty much see everything in 1 split second of from whenever the dinosaurs came or whatever, from whenever the Earth was created to you know, 3,000, 5,000 years from now. You can see that all in 1 second. And
I would say that's a pretty good assessment. I'm going to have to let you go because I don't have much time, but I do thank you for taking the time to call. Have a nice evening. Go ahead and grab another call. Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Hello. Hey, do you know Dwight?
I'm sorry?
Do you know a dude named Dwight?
Dwight? No, I don't think so.
You know the white around your lip, bitch?
My first prank call in a while. Hey, thanks, brother. Breaking the monotony. Have a nice evening. Take this last call quickly. How are you this evening?
Yeah, I know you only got a little bit of time left, so I'll hang up and let you answer this question. But, you
Go
know,
ahead.
most religions, they speak of like a holy wars and like an Armageddon type. Do you think like we're close to this time, like the second coming?
Let me go ahead and let you go on that one. No, I really don't think so. I think we're in the process of a transition time. And end time is kind of a misnomer in my estimation. But really, we're really in a transition time. We're moving from one astrological age to another. And this is more of an opportunity time than a time of, I mean, certainly we see death, destruction, and decay of an old, what is no longer useful. If you read in the gospel narratives that there have to be new skins. You can't put old wine into new skins. And so we have to make a new, and now you hear about the New World Order stuff and all that, and that does tie in, but we have to make a spiritualized New World Order. The New World Order that's being built, we have to take over, take back, and spiritualize and vitalize it and make it a New World Order for everyone. But no, those that wish to enslave us, that want to make this New World Order situation totalitarian, and for just the very, very few, are trying to make it seem as if Revelations is taking place full-fledged right now in our day and age. And so they're taking advantage of that. They're taking advantage of keeping us fearful through inoculations and the concept of chips under the skin and all these things that you can tie into literal interpretations from Revelation or other books that speak of an end time. But in actuality, it's a transition time. And they're really trying to pull the wool over our eyes and make us think that this is the end, when in actuality it's just a change, and we could take advantage of it. But they're trying to hinder us, and the quicker we understand that, the more progress we can make. But thanks everyone for calling. I'd like to thank my producer Chris for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica, and I'd like to remind everybody that we're here every Thursday now from 9 to 10 on Channel 10. And I'd like to remind everybody, please consider voting for Mike Hansen for County Commissioner, Place 4. The voting is November 5th. Thanks, Austin. Take care. Have a nice evening.
I have a comment, an opinion.